I love Thanksgiving, and it combines all of my favorite things, but then we have a tradition, and I'm sure many families have the same tradition of going around and just saying what you're thankful for on Thanksgiving Day. And as you guys know, I come from a huge family. There's over 90 of us on my dad's side now. And so there's a lot. And so when we do this, it ends up taking a couple of hours. And, lunch, it says at 12, we really eat lunch at like 3, just because it takes so long. But it's always worth it. We go and we reflect on how God has worked in our lives. And, we go family by family, person by person. And, there's tears, there's laughter, there's good, and then there's some bad. It's great to hear all the stories in my family of how, someone was promoted, someone got a new job, someone's graduating. There's new babies in the families. There's a lot of good things that happens. And when I was reflecting on it, it got me thinking. Giving thanks to God and reflecting on how God has moved in our lives shouldn't just happen one day out of the whole year, right? Imagine if we, on a regular basis, remembered how God has moved in our lives and give thanks to Him. We're a couple weeks away from Thanksgiving, and so it's not too early to start reflecting on how God has been working in your life this past year and how God is moving in your life. And so this morning, we are going to explore the idea of how we go beyond Thanksgiving and how do we go beyond thankfulness. And what I mean by this is first, moving beyond Thanksgiving. Imagine if we were thankful not just on Thanksgiving, but we were thankful on a regular basis, recognizing God's blessing in our lives and how God has moved in our lives. And then secondly, we are going to look at the idea of how we move beyond thankfulness towards gratitude. Now, some of you guys might be saying thankfulness and gratitude is the same thing, but it's not. I like to think of gratitude as an upgraded version of thankfulness. Gratitude can be defined as the quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for, and to return kindness. The key is in the last part of the definition: readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. Thankfulness is a feeling, is an expression that you have, whereas gratitude, it's an action. Gratitude takes that thankfulness and it acts on it. And there's a perfect story in the Bible that we are going to look at this morning that talks about this. It's Jesus healing the 10 lepers and one man returning to give praise to Jesus. And it's found in Luke chapter 17, verse 11 through 19. So follow along as I read that story for us today. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." As we examine this story and this passage, I'm going to break it up into 3 sections. And the first section is found in verses 11 through 14. And to give you context about this passage, especially this section with the 10 lepers, we need to understand what the lepers were going through in those days. Lepers in those times, they were exiled. They were quarantined from the larger community. They were obligated by law to be separated and disconnected from everyone else. In the Jewish culture, lepers were considered unclean, and there was even a ritual resembling a funeral service, which they were sent off and departed from the community. And They could no longer commune with their family. They could no longer commune with their friends. Imagine that, right? Going through a ritual or a ceremony where it felt like a funeral, where you were alone, where you experienced all this pain and the despair. Imagine being one of those 10 lepers going through that. In some way, you would have went through a social death through this ritual. You couldn't gather with anyone anymore. You can no longer eat meals with your family. You can no longer gather with your friends. And you had to live outside the town. You had to live outside the village. And you can no longer, or you're no longer considered part of the community. You were an outsider. Imagine all the different feelings that was flowing through these 10 men. They were outcasts. They were alone. And the only interaction that they had was with other lepers. And this is why they stood at a distance, and that's why they had to shout out to Jesus, because they were obligated by Jewish law to be separate and distant. Knowing all of this background and knowing this, can you imagine the pain, the loneliness, the despair, the suffering that these 10 men would have went through and gone through? The misery, the loneliness. And when I read and picture this passage, I envision 10 men on the brink of breaking down, right? Sitting by themselves. Their lives are crumbling around them with no hope at all. But it all changes as one man approaches, Jesus. I envision these 10 men, they instantly get up when they see Jesus approaching. They start to whisper, they start to talk among themselves. Is this Jesus who has healed the sick? Is this Jesus who has healed the blind? Is this the same man who makes the lame walk again? They start to wonder. They start to ask questions. Can Jesus save us? Can Jesus heal us? Can Jesus restore our lives again? They are talking among themselves, and then finally, out of despair and hoping that this man named Jesus can save them, they shout out, saying, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Now, some translations in the Bibles have this translation. It says, Master, have mercy on us. And I prefer this translation because it's through this translation we get a better understanding of what these 10 men are asking for. In Psalms 41, verse 1 through 4, it says this, Blessed are those who have regard for the weak. The Lord delivers them in times of trouble. The Lord protects and preserves them. They are counted among the blessed in the land. He does not give them over to the desires of their foes. The Lord sustains them on their sickbed and restores them from their bed of illness. I said, Have mercy on me, Lord. Heal me, for I have sinned against you. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I have sinned against you. Essentially, these 10 men, they're asking Jesus to heal them of their leprosy. And not just their leprosy, but to restore their lives again. They were social outcasts. They were forced to live away from their family and their friends. They went through a ceremonial ritual representing a funeral where they were socially dead. Essentially, they had no life at all. They were distanced and separated. But then everything changes as one man approaches, and that's Jesus. As Jesus enters into the equation, everything changes for them. They shout out in despair, asking Jesus to heal them. And the interesting thing, when we read this section in this passage, is Jesus' response to these men. In verse 14, these 10 men cry out in mercy, but nowhere does Jesus say that, hey, you are healed, and nowhere does Jesus touch them and heals them. Because an earlier story in Luke chapter 5, Jesus touches a leper and he heals them of their leprosy. But in this passage, Jesus doesn't do any of those. However, Jesus does say, go and show yourselves to the priests. Now, this phrase is an interesting one because Jesus doesn't explicitly heal them from leprosy. And as Christians living in the 21st century, we're so far apart from this where we might not understand what exactly is going on. It's only when we get in the mind of a first century Jew and understand their culture, that we understand what's going on. In Leviticus 14, we see that when a person is healed from a sickness, it was the job of the priest to examine that person and to determine if that person has been cured from their sickness. This was one of the roles that the priest performed in the Jewish culture. They were, in essence, a health inspector. They were to examine and determine if that person was truly healed from their sickness, from their illness, and in this case, from their leprosy. If that person is deemed healed and cured, they are allowed to return to the community. So when Jesus says in verse 14, "Go and show yourselves to the priest," Jesus is telling the lepers to act as if they've already been healed, when in fact they haven't been healed yet. Jesus is doing something fascinating. He's testing the faith of these 10 men, telling them to act as if they've been healed. Jesus is asking these 10 men to put their promise in Jesus that he is going to heal them. Because when we look at the rest of verse 14, it says, "And as they went, they were cleansed." It was only when they left to go to the priest that they were cleansed and healed. It is their faith in Jesus Christ and in putting their faith in his promise that they were healed. And this is the first step in how we move beyond thanksgiving and moving beyond thankfulness, putting our promises in Jesus, putting our faith in the promises of Jesus, trusting that he is going to move in our lives, that he is going to restore the brokenness in our lives, all the hurt, all the pain that we experience in our life. If we put our faith in his promises, God is going to work miracles and that he is going to bring us out of those situations. Because when Jesus enters into the equation, everything changes for us. And we might feel like the lepers today. We might feel hopeless. We might feel like there's no way out or there's no solution. We might feel abandoned or alone, left out. But when Jesus comes, he changes everything and he performs miracles. Jesus encounters you in many different ways. And when Jesus comes, if you decide to put your faith in his promises, he's going to bless you and to work miracles in your lives. And as we move on into the second section of this passage, verse 15 through 18, we see in this section, verse 15, only one of them recognized the healing that came through Jesus, and only one person returned to give praise to Jesus. Verse 15 reads, "When he saw that he was healed, he came back praising God in a loud voice." Right? The first part of the verse, we're going to focus on that. When he saw that he was healed. And this is the second step in how we move beyond thanksgiving and thankfulness, recognizing that God has moved in our lives. And this is a crucial step in how we move beyond. When we recognize that God moves in our lives, we are able to be thankful, but more than just that, we become grateful for what God has done. And I want to spend some time in this step because it's important to recognize God's movement in our lives, because sometimes it's not so easy realizing how God is moving in our lives. Sometimes we feel like the lepers in the story, where we feel abandoned, where we feel alone, and sometimes it feels like there's no hope. With everything that's going on in this world, everything that is going on in our culture and everything, it's easy to feel that God's not there with us. You know, maybe you're going through a dry season or you're going through a storm right now and you don't feel God moving in your life. The challenge is recognizing that God is always moving and doing things in our lives. And it comes in ways that we are not expecting or in ways that we are not prepared for. And during this week, we always have a staff meeting, and Abby, our director of admin at the church, she was in charge of leading devotions for us. And so she shared the Footprints in the Sand poem. You know, it's a poem that we've all heard hundreds of times. It's a beautiful poem that speaks about the reality that God is with us always. And so I'm going to go ahead and read that poem for us this morning. It says, "One night I dreamed a dream. As I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at the lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. He whispered, my precious child, I love you and will never leave you. Never ever during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. All right? It was then that I carried you. Maybe you're feeling like that this morning. Maybe you feel as though you're in your toughest and hardest situation that you face in a long time, and you only see one set of footprints. But the reality is, in your trials and tribulations, that's where God is working the hardest and working and doing all his miracles. That's where God holds you close. That's where he picks you up and he carries you and brings you through those storms. You know, as I reflect on this past year and how God has been working in my life, I am astounded and in awe of what God has done through his grace and through his faithfulness. You know, in about 3 weeks, it will be my 1-year anniversary at American Lutheran Church. It's crazy, right? You know, time flies. And if you've been attending ALC long enough, you know that at that time, it wasn't a smooth or easy transition either, all right? Exactly 1 year ago, at this time, the church was going through a lot of trials, a lot of tribulations, and a lot of unknowns was happening. But as I reflect and as I ponder on how God moved in my life and how God has moved through this church, God has been so faithful to us. God carried us through those storms. He brought us to a place of restoration and brought us healing, and he brought us into a place or to a better situation. And I don't know where you are this morning and what trials and tribulations you are currently facing, but I want you to reflect on how God is moving in your life, how God is making a miracle out of your situation right now. It can come in many different ways, and more likely than not, it comes in a way that you are not expecting. And so this morning, we are going to just reflect on how God is moving in our lives. So I'm going to ask all of you guys just to close your eyes and just reflect and think on this past year and ask and reflect, God, how have you been moving in my life? All right, you guys can open your eyes. But as we do this exercise, right, this is the second step in how we move beyond thanksgiving and thankfulness. It's something that we need to do on a regular basis, reflecting on how God has moved in our lives, recognizing God's movement. You know, when the Samaritan man realized that Jesus has healed him, the first thing that he did was run back to Jesus and threw himself at the feet of Jesus. And let me ask you, when was the last time you did that? When was the last time you got on your knees and just thanked Jesus for what he has done for you? Because that Samaritan man, that's what he did. He ran back to Jesus, thanked him, and threw himself on his knees and thanked him. And as we continue this story, all 10 men, they all received the healing power of Jesus, right? All 10 men were healed from leprosy, but only one man came back, and that's why Jesus asked the question, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Now, there's no direct answer that you can find in the Bible or in this story, but as I reflect and wrestle with this story, there's 2 options that I think of. And the first is this. The other 9 are too busy rejoicing and enjoying the restored life that Jesus just gave them. They probably went off and got examined by the priests, and when they were declared clean, they probably went straight to their family and friends who they haven't seen in years. They were enjoying the restored life that they had, and because they were too busy, they forgot to go back to Jesus and thank him for what he has done. And how often do we fall into that trap in our own lives? Jesus brings us through a storm. Jesus performs miracles in our lives. And sometimes we're too busy enjoying the blessing in our life that we forget to go back to Jesus and thank him for bringing us through that storm. And then secondly, another possibility is that the other 9, they didn't recognize that Jesus was the source of their healing and restoration. And maybe that's why they didn't return. They were too busy receiving their blessing that they forgot it is Jesus who heals. It is Jesus who performs miracle. Only one man recognized that Jesus was the source of that miracle. Only one man realized that Jesus was the one who healed them. And we fall into this trap all the time as well, don't we? At times, we fail to recognize that Jesus is the source of our healing, Jesus is the source of our restoration, and Jesus is the source of our blessing, and we end up not going to the cross and thanking him for what he has done for us. And remember at the beginning when I said the difference between thankfulness and gratitude is that gratitude involves some sort of action, whereas thankfulness, is a state of being, it's a feeling, it's an expression. I'm sure the other 9, they were thankful that they were healed from their physical leprosy, but they weren't grateful because they did not return. They did not put it into action. They could not move beyond thankfulness. They were stuck there. Gratitude is the quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. Gratitude is thankfulness being acted upon. It's an action. It's returning the kindness and the mercy that Jesus has blessed us with and he has given in our lives and giving it back to others. And that's the third and final step in how we move beyond. Gratitude is thankfulness being acted upon. And so who are you in this story? Are you one of the 9 who just went off and continued on in the life? Or are you the one who returns and constantly gives praise to Jesus? Because as we finish this story, we see the benefit of moving beyond thankfulness into gratitude. In verse 19, Jesus says to that man, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." The Greek word that's used here is sozo. It means to heal, it means to save, to rescue, or to make you well. In this passage, it carries with it more than the idea of just being healed from your leprosy. Because the other 9, they were healed from their leprosy, but Jesus doesn't say this to them. And so what's going on here is that Jesus is healing and blessing this man beyond the physical infection of leprosy. Jesus is going beyond the physical healing and restoring this man spiritually. He's receiving salvation through his faith in Jesus Christ because he has recognized that Jesus Christ is Lord and that what has happened can only be done by God. And I love this story because it talks about Jesus restoring this man physically, but also spiritually. Now, in seminary school, we call this living a holistic life. It's the idea of living a healthy life that consists of the physical, the spiritual, but also our emotional, social, and our mental well-being, all linked together, living in a healthy way, all being restored by Jesus Christ. And a big part of living that holistic lifestyle is the idea of living a life with gratitude. Gratitude helps people feel more positive. It relishes in good experiences, and it remembers how Jesus has moved in their life. Gratitude helps people deal with adversity by focusing on the faithfulness of God, and it builds strong relationships. And holistic restoration is faith accompanied by gratitude. Faith in Jesus to heal, to save, to bless, and the recognition that he is constantly moving in our lives. But it also requires gratitude, our response and action for what God has blessed us with in our lives. And so as we enter into Thanksgiving and Christmas season, are you willing to go beyond Thanksgiving and thankfulness? And that's my challenge for you this morning. Are you willing to go beyond Thanksgiving, honoring and praising Jesus on a regular basis for what he has done in your life? Are you willing to go beyond thankfulness towards gratitude? this Thanksgiving and this holiday season, are you willing to give someone or to share the love of Jesus Christ with someone? And it can look very different for each of us. Maybe God has blessed you with the gift of hospitality, or maybe you're a really good cook, and so you invite someone over who you know is going to be alone this season, and you invite them over for dinner. Or maybe God has blessed you with finances, so you go beyond and you give to those in need. Maybe you go beyond with your family and your friends and you serve at a homeless shelter or serve here at church. This Sunday, later at 2 o'clock, I'm having the youth group come and serve at the community meal because I want them to learn how to serve. It's very important for me to go beyond and to show our gratitude and what God has blessed us with. There's many ways that we can go beyond, and the greatest way is bringing someone to Jesus Christ, having them experience the love, the grace, and the forgiveness that is found in the cross. And so maybe this holiday season, you bring them to church and allow them to experience Jesus. Whatever it may be, are you willing to go beyond this holiday season?